From the underground to the world stage. One stage, countless voices. The conversation that shapes culture, politics, entertainment, and society. Politicians, comedians, musicians, actors, public servants, leaders, unfiltered, unscripted, unmissable. This is Debated Live.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Debated Live. My name is Jordan Kensington. I'm live and direct right here from our offices in London. How are you? How are you doing? We are broadcasting across all different channels. We're on Vuvix TV, we're on Twitch, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. Literally we're everywhere. Everywhere there is a channel, we are literally making sure we touch every single part of the internet streaming and TV front. So we have some special guests today on the show. Our first guest actually came into my field when I literally saw a video that I'm going to play to you in a second. And that video literally blew me away. It was just literally, it was at the hest, shall I say, of the digital ID fiasco, where everybody was just going crazy about this digital ID business. What is this about? What is going on? And it was, you know, all that chaos. We just had a little voice just step on, and that voice was this video I saw.
You will get a digital ID. You have no choice. But what if we do? Imagine if the whole of the UK decided not to sign up to the mandatory digital ID. Here's what would happen in the first 30 days. And by day 30, that's when the story really begins. Day 1, the rollout begins and nobody signs up. Millions are expected overnight, but online portals sit empty, mate. The press call it a national act of defiance, and the government are just sitting there looking shocked. Day 2 to 4, the system stalls, but people start to adapt. Pharmacies go off book, doctors start handwriting notes, employers pay cash in hand. On the ground, life goes on, just not in the way Labour planned it. Day 5 to 7. Benefits freeze, universal credit, pension, child support, but communities rally. Church halls, mosque, community centres turn into aid hubs. The state may hold the money, but people take care of their own. Day 8 to 12, the media splits. The Mirror and the Independent call it sabotage, but independent outlets call it for what it really is. A proper strike, mate. Here goes Keir Starmer on the news saying, parents should be thinking about their children. But to the public, that man just sounds desperate. Day 13 to 17. Flights cancelled, Brits can't travel because their passport's invalid without a digital upgrade. Tourism collapses, airlines bleed, and the pound dips. Foreign commentators start paying attention, asking, are the UK boycotting their own government? Day 18 to 21. Hospital strain. Appointments carry on, but surgeries and prescriptions start to back up. But doctors and nurses are on this thing too, so they start whispering about breaking some rules. Here comes Starmer again. This is reckless. This is dangerous. Ain't that what we're trying to tell you? Day 22 to 25. Cash in hand spreads. Employers, landlords, shops, they all start leaning off the book. Official trade slows. The underground network grows. And the public keep moving, even though the government are looking real stuck right now. Day 26 to 29. Parliament fractures as protests surge. Labour MPs face a social blackout. No one will talk to them, no shop will serve them, not even a handshake. Thank Ireland for this one. Day 30. A full month in, the refusal holds. System stalled, the economy bleeding, and the government cut off by the people. And the whole world sits waiting and watching. Who will break first? Turns out making digital IDs mandatory wasn't a strength, it was a weakness. And the whole system collapses the moment people stop playing along. But that was just the first month. Wanna know what happens on month 2? Drop a comment below and follow if you're done watching passively. We decode the myth and we don't clap for crumbs.
Do you want to know what happens on part 2? I bet the person who is behind that will tell us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Delwboy on the show. Delwboy, how you doing? You all right?
I am good. I am good. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
No,
that made me smile.
Absolutely a pleasure. Absolutely a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. I mean, when I watched it myself, it was, as I said in the introduction, on the chaos of digital ID. It was that sound, it was that voice, it was that story that made me feel like, you know what, it's good to see a lot of people waking up to, getting that message out there, but in such a way that it actually touches people. Because a lot of things that people kind of react to are things that will touch them. And storytelling has always been a big part. So tell us how you got into storytelling, and then tell us what inspired you to do this very segment on digital ID.
Yeah, sure. Well, storytelling, I've always been interested in, to be honest with you. From like as a young child, my mom told me stories about Anansi, and I was just drawn into it. And I have a background in in theater and acting, and I also have a degree in digital animation and interactive design as well. So I've with all of that combined, it's just what everyone's starting to see now, really. So I've always loved storytelling, and I've always wanted to continue to do more with storytelling and bring it to wider spaces, into the real world, and onto lasting platforms too. And when it came to this particular story, I was scrolling my feed as most of us do, and I stopped on a press conference, as it was, with Keir Starmer, where he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but something along the lines of, you will need it in order to work. If you don't have it. And he said, I think the line he said after that was, it's as simple as that. And that sounded very much to me like a parent talking to a child, very just like, you just need to do this and you have no choice about it. And I get inspiration for stories like left, right, and center continuously. And as soon as I heard that, it just kind of brought me into this space where, like Matilda, I'm big, you're small, that kind of vibe. And also,
Yes.
and also there was like ants as well, ants. So growing up, seeing ants, and the crickets were saying, you just need to do all of this stuff for us, but there's a lot of power in the people. And hearing him say that, especially about something like working, where we all need to work to live, like that's our livelihood. We've got people to provide for ourselves, bills to pay, a roof over our head, etc. It's a bit different than the COVID was with travel. For many people, travel is just a luxury, but working we have to do. So with that, I was like, this doesn't sound right. It sounds, I can hear a story right here. I can hear a way. And if you see my stuff as well, you will see that I tell a lot of stories around this kind of scope and in this kind of format too. So it instantly inspired me to get my pen out, and well, it's digital now, I'm typing, but just start generating this story and putting and piecing it all together, really. So yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. And obviously you touched on digital ID then. So this came as no surprise to a lot of people who've been looking at, the COVID crisis that happened years ago, and seen, predicting a lot of things, basically, that was going to happen in the future. And then this digital ID thing has come along. What is your take on digital ID? What is your take on the fact that they've used the term mandatory, but obviously we know that was the same term that was used during COVID, and it was just a term because a lot of people, you had to do certain things to get a job. You had to do certain things to travel. There was a lot of things that didn't feel like it was not mandatory. So the term didn't really come into play. What is your thoughts on it? What's your take on the way Keir Starmer has introduced it? Will it be something that you're going to be taking on yourself, or is it something that you're strongly against?
In regards to that, I think the best part about art is that my stories definitely give a lot about how I feel about the situations and how I feel about what's happening, and especially the language being used. Language is really important, and as a storyteller, that's just everything. The way things are being said, and Keir Starmer is definitely by no means a silly man, and he is using language as he sees fit to give off whatever message he wants to give off. So I think more so I was drawn to the language than anything about the digital ID itself. Although I've seen a lot of comments, and it seems like a lot of people aren't for it. A lot of people don't feel that they can trust it. There's a lot of talk about people, cybersecurity threats, and also people without smartphones, what they're going to do, homeless people, etc. There's a lot of talk around that. But my views personally, I definitely love for them to be said through my art.
I like that. I like that. So with that being said, was part 2 made, or are you in the process of doing part 2?
I am in the process of doing part 2. I know what I want it to be about. I'm torn a little bit because it could overlap with another story I wanted to tell in general, but it might just be right for it. But I definitely, I knew instantly as I'd done the first one, I had to kind of restrain myself rather than just going straight for the 2 months. So yeah, second month is in the pipeline, and I'm ready to put that out very soon. So do watch this space and do follow me, because you will find out what's going to happen in the second month.
No, I love that. One of the guests we had on the show several years ago actually was a guy known as Rapman, who used the same sort of format you're using, and with just his mobile phone to create his own kind of stories through something called Shiro Stories, and that grew to become extremely popular online. And we were lucky enough to catch him during the start. I think we were like a good luck charm for him. We were the start of his journey, and we could see that there was a lot of talent there. And literally, I think literally a week after we interviewed him, he was signed by Rock Nation, and then he went on to do Blue Story, one of the biggest grossing films on Netflix, and a lot more. Do you think for storytellers back in the day, if you wanted to get into storytelling films and things like that, you had to get a publisher? If you want to write a book, or if you want to get onto film, you have to really submit your scripts for someone to market and say, I like this, I don't like this. Do you think social media now has made it so much easier for you to just get up, write what you want to write, put your ideas together, use a bit of AI, and you start talking directly to the consumers rather than actually waiting for someone to commission it? Do you think that's made it easier for you to kind of break through the noise?
I wouldn't say easier is the word. I think it still requires a lot of skill. And there's a lot of people who come online and have amazing stories, but it's a different format, social media. It's so knowing how to translate the story that you can think of for film or for television, as I do have many of those ideas, and knowing how to translate it into a 3-minute clip that works for social media is definitely a skill. So I wouldn't say easier. And even in terms of like getting people to actually enjoy it, like actually having a good story in the first place, that's still not an easy task either. It has afforded people the opportunity to take it in their own hands, though, which is good. But that's across all industries, to be fair, especially like public-facing industries, like with music and with fashion and so many other things. Social media has definitely afforded people to do that for themselves, and that's what I'm fortunate enough that it's been able to work for me. And now it's just about continuing to grow and continuing for more people to see my stories, so that I'm able to take it off and do things just like him and go into film and go into television, so I can tell my stories in that wider, long form formats too.
That's actually the next question I had for you was, what's the plan for television and film? Obviously, we're quite in that industry in a massive way. So what is the plan for TV and film with you? Is there a set plan to start writing for television, start creating your own show for film, creating films? What is the plan for you future-wise?
Yeah, I have film and television ideas ready to go, to be fair. I less so feel like I need to write all of them myself. I want to creative produce, I want to direct, and I also want to work with new talent of writers and bring writers up, new talent of actors, bring actors up as well. I was really inspired by Spike Lee growing up, not only for the way he done his films and the way he moved culture, but mostly the way like so many actors came through his movies, and loads of the big black actors that we know that done major hits in the 90s started off in his films, and he gave those people chances. And I love that. I love that idea of like finding new talent and really working well with them and crafting that. And yeah, I just want to definitely create film and create movies and bring new talent through. That is like the ultimate goal for me. And I've got those ideas ready, loaded. I'm ready to go.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, obviously, a lot of viewers might ask me after the show goes broadcast. They will say, "Why didn't you ask him about his name? Why didn't you ask him about his name?" We famously gave an award to Nicholas Lyndhurst and David Jason, Sir David Jason, who are obviously, for people that don't know, people who are old enough to know, they were the lead characters of Only Fools and Horses, which was a legendary TV show. And they were in tears when we gave them that Lifetime Achievement Award. And so I have to ask, is the Delwboy from that show, is that inspired by that show?
Part and part. So
Okay.
I've always been called Delboy since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And the W.
What is it, because you're a bit of a geezer then? Do you have a kind of geezer trait? Because to be called Delboy.
I don't know if it's a geezer trait. I don't know if it's a geezer trait. It's just been my nickname from
Right.
like my parents called me it, my siblings called me it. And like people like that I've met along the way, like in school and so on and so forth. So Delboy's always been my nickname. As for the spelling, the W helps like emphasize how British I am. Del, like Delboy. But yeah, Delboy has just always been my name, and definitely inspired by Only Fools and Horses, because I mean it's quintessentially British, and ultimately that is what I am. I'm a South Londoner, born and bred in Brixton. So this is just me. I'm a Londoner. I'm British. I'm Delboy.
I love it. Now, Delboy, your content, I've watched since I discovered this video. I watched several of your other content. You touch on a lot of things that are would I say sore topics, like hardcore topics, but you make it sound fun, and obviously the audience gets to learn and goes through that journey. You know, there is a knack to any talent that everyone's got. People have, you know, God-gifted talent, and some people have to also add a little bit of spice on it. And that spice comes from inspiration, like a chef in the kitchen. You don't just be inspired just by yourself. You have to learn from cookbooks. You have to learn from all the different chefs to become your own kind of Gordon Ramsay. Where did you learn to write in that manner? Because you take people in a journey and you really get them into it. Where did you learn? Did you learn at school, or were you inspired by someone that's, you know, a writer in the past? How did you learn to get there?
A number of places, to be honest. Like, and if I'm even more honest, that's just one style of writing that I do. But this particular one, I wanted to mostly make sure that I inserted personality into it. And I think that's what helps a lot, especially with sore topics or polarizing topics. It's really good that you can have moments of fresh air, so it doesn't sound like it's just this person angry, this person complaining, this person just worried about something, because we are multifaceted. We do go through all of emotions, and we don't feel the exact same about every last thing. And if I approach the story like that, and if I approach different parts of the story as for what it is, rather than this whole package of how does this whole entire thing make somebody feel, it helps bring people along with the journey. That paired with like just knowing storytelling in general, like from the 50s when like the happy endings came in through like post-war, and just like how to tell a story arc, all of that really involved as well in it, just so that people are bring through their suspense and etc. and etc. So there's a number of skills that are going in there, but on social media particularly, I definitely try to make sure I insert personality, and just to help these stories travel through, and so people can get to know me a little bit more as well.
Amazing. So future-wise, what would you, I mean, obviously you're still young now, but it's always good to think about legacy and things like that. I always ask people on the show, Debated, what would you like your legacy to be in the future? If they say, hey, do you remember Delwboy? What would you want your legacy to be?
Someone who's created amazing stories for people, but not just oh, it's just hitting numbers or something, but it's shifted culture, it's open conversations, it's appeared in uncomfortable places, that's helped people move forward, inspired, and also just also help people grow, like professionally too. Like I want definitely people to think about the stuff that I've made and the amount of talent that has been able to go through, that I've been able to nurture and help also, because we are a community. This is, we need to just like help each other grow too. And that's just something I'm really passionate about as well. So not only do I want the stories that I tell and the morals behind them to really touch people, I also want it to be an opportunity for other people to really thrive also.
Absolutely amazing. Delwboy, keep on making those stories, and I will keep on watching, and a lot of people will keep watching out there. If you want to find out more about Delwboy, is at Delwboy on Instagram, and I think on all platforms as well, right?
On all social media, yeah. So definitely follow me on social media.
And I tell you what, Delwboy, I can't wait for part 2. So don't let us down. We are waiting for part 2. We might have to bring you back on the show when you do your part 2 as well. Yeah.
All right, then. Yeah, it sounds like a plan.
Amazing. Looks, take care, and it was lovely having you on the show. And wish you all the best, mate.
Thank you for having me, man. Cheers.
Amazing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Delwboy right here on Debated Live. And next up is a very special guest. We've had him on the show before, but he's one of the good friends and special guests on the show. Before we introduce him, let's see some of him in action. Let's go.
Exactly. Thank you to my friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that the letter that I wrote and signed by many members on the bench today, including himself, in 2021 when Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, wanted to put a charge, a border tax as I called it, on people driving into London, which had nothing to do with the environment at that time, when he failed with that after the pressure that was put on, shock horror, a little bit later, but the same thing out, but with an environmental taint to it. I think it's greenwashing, and actually it's just making the people who work so hard in places like Watford pay extra just to go to work.
Well said.
Thank you to the people of Watford. Watford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what an offer. I'd be delighted to visit Watford. Watford, where of course the sun always shines.
Watford.
He does an excellent job for Watford.
Watford. Can I take the opportunity to thank him as a stalwart advocate of the Watford cluster?
Watford.
I'd like to congratulate the honourable member for again securing another opportunity to speak upon behalf of his constituents in Watford.
Watford.
This is excellent campaigning on behalf of his constituents in Watford.
My honourable friend has done an exceptional job in Watford. I thank my honourable friend from Watford standing up as ever for his constituents.
Watford. None of his colleagues ever can say that they don't know anything about Watford.
Watford. He is a a fantastic champion for Watford. Watford.
Watford, 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 Watford,
and continue to deliver for the great people of Watford.
That's right. Welcome, Dean Russell, on the show. The former MP, Member of Parliament for Watford. If you don't know him yet, I mean, if anybody can represent a place like you have, I mean, Watford, Watford, Watford. I mean, that should be a new song that goes #1 in the charts. Dean, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. That took me back. It was like a journey through haircuts as well, looking over those years representing the great Watford. But no, thank you so much for being on the show. And it's a real delight to be on here. And as always, you do such a great job of really asking questions and in a way that people can really shine. So thank you.
No, I loved it, and it's lovely having you back on the show as well. So that we showed a little bit about what you achieved as Member of Parliament for Watford, and you did a lot for Watford, but not just for Watford. I mean, one of the bills that you introduced was a tips bill, and the tips bill is something that I'm sure when we did the restaurant awards, a lot of people that work in restaurants across the country, all thank you. For that, and what? Firstly, before we even dive into our topic of the day, what made you introduce the tips bill? What was it about that? That it must have been something you saw, some complaints you received. What made you fight for the people who really do all the work when it comes to service in restaurants?
No, thank you for asking. Actually, it takes me back, but there were several reasons. One, at the heart of it was fairness. And weirdly, actually, considering we'll talk about digital ID later, it was also related to the use of or the reduction in people using cash. So during COVID, we had that period where people started to go back out again. I think it was the Eat Out to Help Out period, and people were going back into cafes and so on. And I noticed something that had been going on for years, but it sort of ramped up a bit, which was that when people went to pay, usually would go and give a tip with cash, they were having to pay by credit card. And if you remember at the time, especially in the UK, everywhere shifted to having QR codes on tables. Everything was via credit card. And everyone saw on their bills the usually 12.5% service charge. And every meal, every coffee, everything always ended with the same phrase, which was, will you get this tip? So whenever they spoke to the waiters or waitresses, they'd all say, will you get this tip? And you realize actually in the UK, that's something that people have said for a long, long time. And so I'd started to look into it and realized that actually there was no protection for workers in the hospitality space for them to keep the tips. If you were paying a tip through the business or through credit card or whatever, where the organization was going to be owning that money and then giving it back, there were no protections. So, and there were instances of businesses, and quite a lot, not all of them, to be fair, a lot of hospitality businesses are very ethical and good guys, but the small few who were not giving the staff the tips were not only taking money out of the pockets of their own employees, but actually they were able to also undercut the competitiveness with their competitors, because they were able to charge less because they were taking the service charge off the top and keeping that money. And so I just felt it was deeply, deeply unfair. I'd started to look into it in more detail and realised that Sajid Javid in around 2015, when Secretary of State for Business, had looked into it, but it hadn't happened. It had been in a Queen's speech, still hadn't happened, been in a manifesto, still hadn't happened. So I then worked with government and pushed what was called a presentation bill. It's a private member's bill of sorts, to get the government to include it in their employment rights bill, which then didn't happen. So it stopped again. And then I, through good fortune, managed to get what's called a private member's bill. And this is a very peculiar part of British Parliament, that every time there's a king or queen speech, Parliament sort of resets its diary. And so there's a raffle effectively. So you write down a number on a bit of paper, between 1 and I think 500. And if your number is in the top 20 that get pulled out, like you see on the lottery every week, if your number gets pulled out, you get and you're in the top 20, you get what's called a private member's bill. And it means you can effectively debate your bill on a Friday sitting in Parliament. And very long story short, I managed to, fortunately, God was shining on me, as it were, helped me get that number. I then became a backbench, managed to pick up the tips bill. I knew the government would back it, got it through. And then again, fortune shone on me and I became the minister for it. I helped get it through the next stage. I gave it to one of my colleagues, Virginia Crosby, to take through the third stage at that point. I then went back on the backbenches and then we got it through and it became law in October last year. And so what it means is there's millions of hospitality workers every year now that will have no worries because 100% of that tip has to go to them and every establishment has to say how they'll share the tip. So, yeah, I'm very proud of it. And it was a very much a persistent project for me and I'm glad it got through.
That's absolutely amazing, Dean. That's literally something that a lot of workers will be thanking you for because it's something that's well needed, especially during this time. Talking about passing a bill in Parliament leads me quite nicely to our topic of the day, which is digital ID. And, you know, this came for a lot of people that have been seeing trends and, you know, study, you know, what's happening in the world for a long time. We've seen it coming. We've seen it coming for I mean, even when there was whispers of introduction of CBDC, you know, looking even at, you know, QR codes, we kind of saw an emergence of something like this coming into play. Tony Blair tried it, you know, years ago. It didn't work because people revolted against it. Keir Starmer has taken a different swing at it. And the way he's done it, I'll wait to hear what you think. But I feel the way he's done it, it's such a way that I will look at as problem, reaction, solution. So the first thing, you know, which was done by the government was create a problem. The immigration became a huge problem. A lot of people that are not racist and are not that way inclined, the reason why they got a little bit angry about the immigration problem, it was because it seemed as though it was intentionally being created by the government. I'm saying it seems as though because I'm using my legal brain here to say, well, where we always say allegedly, but if you look into it properly, it is very clear that there's been a lot of investment into getting, you know, people illegally into the country, even going as far as housing them in the best hotels and making sure, you know, they caused trouble. And when you look at that, it's a problem created for people to react, and the people reacted as was the problem that was created. And then the solution was given to them, which was, we want to introduce digital ID. Now, in a normal world, saying that you should be ID'd in a normal world, after we've been used to passports, national insurance, national IDs, and you know all the IDs that come, driving license. In a normal world, people have been preconditioned. It shouldn't be like that because, you know, in the back in the day, the ancient days in villages, you didn't need an ID to walk around. But in a normal world, we've been pre-programmed, preconditioned to agree that you need a passport to passports. We've agreed that that's something that it just creates a level of security that, you know, hey, we are on this plane and everybody on this plane is being checked. There's not some crazy person sat next to me. However, the way it's being introduced, and because a lot of people do not trust the government anymore, there's been a lot of things being raised, because we understand that after the last few years, we understand that anything the government say they're going to give us, there's always other things added to it. So digital ID today, not mandatory today, and tomorrow it will be employers like ourselves being told, if you hire someone via digital ID, you're going to be fined. So we have to go into that, and then next it will be a Black Mirror story. It will be social credit scores. Before you answer that question, I want to play a little clip from China. so you can see the point emphasized more clearly.
So the latest.
You.
So the latest. So the latest in this dystopian outrage that is now all of China apparently is I once again cannot buy food. A couple days ago, my uncle and my cousin helped me.
You see, the digital ID is fighting us getting the information.
So the latest in this dystopian outrage that is now all of China apparently is I once again cannot buy.
So with the clip I'm gonna play in a minute.
So the latest in this dystopian outrage that is now all of China apparently is I once again cannot buy food. A couple days ago, my uncle and my cousin helped me get a cell phone that is linked to a Chinese bank card so that I could buy anything. But now, apparently, it has been flagged for some reason, and I have to pass facial recognition identity verification, which is insane, because all I want to do is just spend my gift card balance on this debit card. I can't believe I'm doing this. I have to open my mouth. Oh my god. Terrifying. Well, and of course, because it was my cousin who set this up for me, I did not pass verification. I guess it's a good thing that the Chinese app is not racist. But now, I once again can't buy.
That literally shows you a little bit about what China is going through now. This is a lot of things that are not reported in the mainstream media because China is an amazing country, but they have got an amazing claw on the media. Whatever goes out is very, very much, very, very protected. Now, your views on digital ID, after seeing a video like that, there are more videos of people who have gone through not being able to even get food for the whole month because your social credit score is down. Some people can't feed their families, can't send their children to school because the digital ID connected to their social credit says, the computer says no, they've breached something. And, some people just comment online on one of the Chinese platforms, WeChat, about something they don't like about the government. And then what happens is their digital ID is restricted so that they can't move freely, even on trains, anywhere else. This is what's happening in real time. This is what the government and Keir Starmer is wanting to introduce. What is your take on that, Dean?
Well, I have quite strong feelings about this. I'm very, very opposed to mandatory digital ID for many reasons. And actually, ironically, I used to be the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for digital ID. And it was never, in my view, about, mandatory digital ID, because the core concept of digital ID actually for individuals should be about protecting one's own data. And the government shouldn't necessarily be involved in that. So I'll give you a scenario of where it could be valuable or should be valuable without government interference is, for example, if you're 18 in the UK, you can drink in a pub. The amount of 18-year-olds, and I'm sure I did back in the day, you might go in and to prove that you're 18, you might go in, show your driver license, or perhaps have to show your passport. You're giving away far more data just to prove your date of birth. And then that person not only knows your name, potentially your address behind the bar, but also your date of birth. Whereas actually where digital ID could be used, where you own the data yourself, is you just literally show yes or no, are you over 18? That's all they need to know, yes or no, not the detail. Now, that's where digital ID can be quite powerful. And actually the idea of owning your own data and not giving other people access to more information than they need to know about you, I think can be very valuable and has got a role to play. However, this idea of a mandatory digital ID, you could get rid of the word digital. It's a mandatory ID, and therefore it's a mandatory ID card, and therefore you could end up on the slippery slope, which is in a matter of years' time, where you're walking down the street and the police say, show me your ID. That's not a world I want to live in. And I think my worry is, as you pointed to earlier, is this slippery slope of where does this lead? Now, I don't believe necessarily there's a massive conspiracy behind it. I don't necessarily believe that there's necessarily that Labour have got this big grand plan. But what I do believe is that there can be unintended consequences. I think the way that they rushed out the announcement was to try and avoid the news about other crises and issues that we're having at the time. But the truth is, in my mind, is that once you start to go down this route of mandatory IDs for work, it then becomes, can you get a hospital appointment? Can you get other appointments? Can you get your money out of the bank? Those aren't unreal worries, because the world is digital now. And so these things will work together. And my worry isn't just that they might go down that route because they work, but actually you might go down that route because it doesn't work. You know, we've seen IT systems in government IT systems in the UK in particular over many decades that just don't work properly. In the early 2000s, there was a huge amount of money wasted on IT systems in the NHS that didn't work. In fact, I remember at the time I was doing work as a consultant and was asked to look at every NHS website back in 2009-10 for a project. And I found out, I did the financial analysis of it and worked out that back then the Labour government was spending between 83 and 121 million pounds a year just on websites that most people didn't even know existed. So the problem for me isn't just the risk of where this could go if it's purposefully being used to limit our freedoms, but also the unintended consequences of incompetence by government and by technology and by systems not working, which could stop you using these things. And if I may say, actually, the example that was given in the video of somebody having to look around and use their face to log into something, I won't say which platform, but I've had the same situation where
I've had the same situation too,
and haven't been able to for a long time because it doesn't recognize me. And I've shown my driving license, I've shown my passport, all of those things. And so this stuff isn't, just happening in other places. It happens all the time. And it's the risk of all of those things coming together, which effectively limit our liberty, limit our freedoms, but also can be done both purposefully and through incompetence. And the latter is what really worries me, because once the computer says no, in every part of your life, you really are in trouble.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I find when it comes to the government, I find there's always a level of information hierarchy. What I mean by that is that I find there's a lot of good people in every profession, and it depends on what information you're privy to. So I think when it comes to digital IDs, I think a lot of people in the government might be privy to all the information they know. And then there's other levels who have their own meetings who are privy to other information. For example, we know the World Economic Forum released a document a few years ago that predicted digital IDs. Not predicted, I mean, let's just call it for what it is, planned digital IDs. And there was a statement that was released, which was, you will not own anything, but you will be happy. I mean, if that doesn't sound off the biggest horror movie, we're not saying people should be materialistic. We're saying you're living in a world where there is a control grid that's not even from your elected officials. Because the control grid with digital ID, with everybody uniformly, every country slowly getting into it. Norway has gone in, like every country is signing up to it. It's so uniformed that it will be a one world government, a one world ID system. And we've already seen in healthcare, the WHO there's been a law that's been passed on that they will have a huge amount of control in pandemic decisions for countries. So they can bypass your country's laws to kind of dictate whether there should be a lockdown in certain countries. Now, connected to the World Economic Forum and their prediction of what they want to do with digital ID, and also a prediction of what's happening with CBDC. And I don't know why I'm calling it a prediction. Let's just call it a plan of what's going to happen with CBDC, because cash is getting rid of. Are we not looking at the start of a dystopian future for our kids and the next generation if we don't do something about it? Because it's being introduced very calmly as a nice little, as you explained it, there are nice ways of defining what a digital ID is and what the benefits could be. But when in the hands of the wrong people, which are the people we've talked about, it will be a dystopian future. And we've seen that being planned for years. This is not something there. I mean, this document is there, it's clear, it's pretty clear. Agenda 2030 is pretty much clear, and it's there. I mean, this was they spent a lot of money promoting it. You will not own anything, but you will be happy. This was a statement that was promoted all across. And if you look at everything in that statement, digital ID was one of them, to make sure everybody is connected and everybody is controlled by a controlled grid. And this is no longer something just void of evidence. This is clearly something that you can look up, and is literally all governments are party to it. So do you think there's a level of information, a hierarchy of information that's going through? That could mean if people vote in parliament for something like a bill, they are voting based on the knowledge they are privy to, and the other knowledge that they are not privy to, or the actual reason behind the thing. For example, digital ID, I feel there is an end reason behind introducing digital ID, which is full control of humans.
I wouldn't go that far. It doesn't mean there aren't people who would want to do that, and it doesn't mean there aren't people who might have those goals in mind. But I do think there are, especially in British Parliament, and the reason why I was not to reopen the Brexit debate, but why I was always on the side of making sure that Parliament has supremacy effectively in the UK. That when you vote for your local MP, that they aren't then having to listen to the wills of unelected bureaucrats in other parts of the world. But I think for me, it's a slightly different take, actually. And I think I had a short time as a minister, and I think actually some of these things come also almost out of convenience. Don't get me wrong. Of course, there's always been people in the world and powerful figures in every generation who want to do certain things. But I think for me, what we've seen in the UK in particular since this announcement last week, which again, I think was very much rushed through, it was to try and avoid more talk about another potential scandal in the government. I think my take on it is slightly different, that what I saw in government and in Parliament, in part, was sometimes gaps in cohesiveness in terms of what people wanted to achieve. Departments not always working together, not necessarily for bad reason, but because people are human. I think there's an element as well of making sure that democracy stands. And I think what we've seen over the past week since that very poorly made and ridiculous decision that was made to announce some form of mandatory digital ID was that the general public have very much pushed back against it. Both left and right have said this is a ridiculous idea. All of the risks of what this might mean have been spoken about. And surprisingly, or rather unsurprisingly, Keir Starmer didn't mention it very much in his conference speech earlier this week. So I think in a way it was what they would call a dead cat announcement. It was to try and get people to talk about something else other than what they were. But that sort of plays into what I'm talking about as well, though, because my worry is that these things sometimes go through the motions and become something for the wrong reasons. if this was something that really the government believed in, they wouldn't mind there being years upon years of proper scrutiny of the committees, of everything else going on. But they weren't looking in that direction. In fact, they didn't even announce it, I don't think, in Parliament. They announced it in recess. So for me, once you start looking at doing things outside of parliamentary procedure, outside of the normal parliamentary process, that is worrying, because that effectively is saying that the people that have been voted in as MPs to represent constituencies aren't going to be able to have a proper say in how this is going to play out. And that is a worry. But I think, as I said earlier, my bigger concern with some of these are the unintended consequences, the incompetence that sometimes comes through, the fact that there might be these big goals by some individuals, but as was said by I think it was Brian Clough, the football manager, said something along the lines of when talking about his team losing. I think he said, the team looked brilliant on paper. Trouble is, we play on grass. And I think sometimes the strategy looked brilliant on paper. Sometimes we play on grass, and I think sometimes these strategies, when if they have got them in any form, when they hit the ground and the general public are made aware of them, usually there is a backlash. But my worry is that these things are coming fast, very fast. You've got assisted dying going through as a private member's bill, which again was, that was the way I got my TIPS bill through. But my TIPS bill wasn't a matter of life and death. These are things are very, very serious topics that really should be given proper time and scrutiny within Parliament, and it's been done as a private member's bill, requiring one individual MP to push it through. So I think that's not right. Personally, I wouldn't have voted for it, but that's my own stance. But even if people were pro it, it's not being given the right opportunity for the representatives of the people to debate it in Parliament. And that's my bigger worry, that these things can get pushed through without the right scrutiny.
It's amazing that you mentioned time and scrutiny. And our first guest, Delwboy, actually mentioned it was the words of Keir Starmer that rang fear into people. What he said is, you will not be able to work if you don't have digital IDs. And he repeated it and said it so callously. And I do agree that a lot of things that we get fed sometimes are distraction tactics on, obviously, getting people to see one way when something else is going on. We own media, we own newspapers, so we get those releases. We understand how it all works. However, this is something that is in the plan. It's not something, and it's something that Tony Blair is consistently pushing, has been paid millions of pounds to push. This is something that's been taken seriously. And also, even if it's a distraction for something else, it is something, it's an agenda that's being introduced in uniformly in different countries as we speak. And we're not the only people fighting this. There's a lot of countries that are fighting it. And we've just showed this clip. And China didn't have to worry. China have had it for years. And the people, there are a lot of people suffering because of digital ID. And the ones that are not suffering and the ones that are cowardized and have decided, there's nothing we can do about it. So time and scrutiny, scrutiny by who? The problem is elected officials who are scrutinizing policy. Is that a dated way of governing, or do people want to be governed in that level? That's the question as well. In today's society, do I want a group of people in Parliament deciding what my future should be, or should I play a big part in making sure anything you want to pass on as a law that will affect me and my future and my kids and everybody else, I need to be able to decide. So that scrutiny, should that be the Parliament or should that be the people themselves?
It's both, really. I mean, the truth is, I lost my election last year because people were fed up of a party that, which I'm still very much part of, but we have to be honest, they got fed up of the Conservatives over the time that we're in power. We came in 2019 with a massive majority because the people wanted us to get Brexit done, get a lot of other things done. That was obviously knocked off course very much by COVID. I won't rehash the past 5 or 6 years, but the truth is, the democracy worked. As much as it grieves me, because I would have loved to continue as an MP and carry on doing what I was doing and hopefully making a difference. But democracy worked. They got rid of me and all of many of my colleagues because they didn't feel that we were doing what they wanted them to do. Now, Labour came in with quite a small vote share, but very, very large majority. So I don't think their mandate's quite the idea that the whole country is behind them on this stuff. But what I would say is that, democracy does work when people are engaged with it. And I think the truth is with the scrutiny is that every day, a lot of the job of an MP is you're doing casework, you're getting feedback. Me and my team did about, I think it's like 25,000 cases over the course of the 4.5 years I was in the role. So that was going out, meeting people, speaking to them about their concerns, being aware of the worries they had. And then I was then there to represent them in Parliament, including how I scrutinised things, the questions I asked, all of those things. In fact, most of the questions, if anyone went through the questions I asked in Parliament, most of them will be related to Watford in some way, or related to questions that I was given or concerns that the general public had. And so that, I think Churchill said, he said something like democracy is the best of the worst, or the best of the worst options. There's lots of ways that things could be played, but I think the way the system works is politicians should be close to the people, and I was a public servant, and therefore we should be serving the needs of the people. Where it gets worrying, and I think your concern is where it's the politicians telling them what to do and not listening to them.
You see, it's difficult to put you on the spot on this, because I knew you before you were an MP, and I knew how much you cared about people. I mean, in fact, we've gone door to door, doing charity for people, handing out. I know how much you care about people, but unfortunately, Dean, you're one in a million. There are loads that we have to be completely honest. When you say democracy works, it's because you're seeing that from your lens of who you are as a person. And that's the reason why, the last conversation we have, that's the reason why you can go into Parliament and go into government and go into it because you are who you are before you got there. And when you walk out of government, you're going to still be that same person. You don't change because government made you change. You are who you are before you got there. There's a lot of people that always were not completely straight down the middle. Some of these people didn't even care about people in the first place. They cared about power. So democracy to a lot of people looks like information. That's why I said it's an information hierarchy. What happened with this Keir Starmer's announcement was that it was reported to normal people as if this is already been passed and is happening. And when you read the newspapers and you watch the news, there is no blurred lines. There's like, this is going to happen. So if you were trying to vote against something, or you're trying to it's surprising that over 2 million people have signed a petition against it. But the thing is, to be honest, it could be more than 2 million people. But propaganda is democracy, because if you give me the wrong information, I don't want to talk about Brexit, but if you give me the wrong information, I will turn to vote for what feels like what you've given to me. Now, if I feel helpless, not me personally, most people, when they feel helpless, it's like, well, there's nothing we can do. We can't fight this. You've heard, the news have said it. It's been reported all across every newspaper. Most newspaper, the digital ID is going to be introduced, whether you like it or not. You will not get any job if you don't have a digital ID. Digital ID coming at the end of this. This is what's being reported, and it's reported as though it's happened already. And words have a strong significance in people's lives. And I feel like the reason why I feel democracy is not because most of the things people vote for is based on information they have. And most of the information they have, you will find when you go through the years, if we talk about a Labour government, we talk about Tony Blair and weapons of mass destruction. We went into war thinking there was weapons of mass destruction. Everyone's forgotten that we went into a war based on a lie. and millions of people were killed based on a lie. So why would we trust the same government again on something that we already know was going to happen? If you're in the know, you know exactly where we're going with digital ID. So I hear you on the lens of democracy based on what you're saying. It should be like that, but is it really?
I think there's a truth to all sides of that, in the sense that, you know, of course, there's people who go into politics because they just want the power or the ego or whatever. What tends to happen, I think, is quite quickly they realise that that they are a public servant, and those who go into it for the wrong reasons usually get caught out eventually, especially if they're greedy with expenses or whatever. But I think that the truth is, so for me, I never claimed a penny in personal expenses. I didn't think it was the right thing to do, so I didn't. But for me, but that was because I live close to London. Other people had different needs and were traveling very far, and so that's fair enough. But what I would say is that I think the truth of it is that because of the nature of the way that democracy is in the UK, at the end of the day, within 4 or 5 years of getting elected, there's a very good risk of getting booted out. And I can tell you that during my time, especially the last year or two in Parliament, you could see the weight of the fact that we were going into an election very much wounded, had on people, and you saw a lot of rebellions, you saw a lot of infighting, you saw all of those things. And what Keir Starmer's got within Labour, without getting too political about it, but he's sort of supercharged that, and he's got those fractures already. So actually, the risk for them is, if somebody goes into Parliament or politics for power, they're going to want to stay in power. And the beauty of the politics within the UK is that the people do get a vote every few years. They do show their strength. And that's what happened last year. It happened in previous elections. And so we need to make sure that that voice isn't muted, and also make sure that people know how to engage, know how to write to their MP, know how to raise their concerns, know how to write letters, which sounds ridiculous because you would think writing a letter, so what? But actually, as an MP, one of the most powerful things you could do would be to write a letter to a minister, because they have to reply, and they have to give a response for your constituent on what the situation is. And so actually, I can't think of any other better system than having people have a say over their local politician, their local MP, in terms of their decision making. Now, that doesn't mean that the MP will always do what their constituents say, but believe me, from my experience and looking around, they do listen. And when you've got something like this where there's such a strong push against it, what you don't want to do is have it go quiet. You don't want it to just be a news story for a week. It needs to be a consistent voice to make sure that not only and there's a phrase I've used in the past, which is that, it's more powerful to whisper into the ear of power than it is to shout in its face. But sometimes you need to have both, having people writing in, engaging with their MPs, going to surgeries to talk to them and explain to them that they will not vote for them again if they support this, that they won't back them in the future on this. Perhaps the donors in those instances, they won't be donating, they won't be delivering leaflets for them. Then actually that does have a huge sway, because the only way you stay in power is having the people on your side to keep you there. And if you don't do that, say if digital ID were brought in under this government, very, very quickly it's likely to be that government's going to be kicked out and the next one will undo it. And that's what we're seeing on lots of things. So I'm not so fatalist about it. I'm not so, but I'm also mindful of the risks, and that's why I'm not pro mandatory ID, because it's such a slippery slope that, as you say, you start to get into other areas that are beyond getting work. Could be about healthcare, could be about your banking, could be lots of other areas, whether purposefully or through incompetence, could affect individuals' lives. And that is a great worry. And that's why I think it's important for people to voice their concerns.
Now, a lot of people are setting up organizations. There's Together Declaration. There's a lot of organizations that have been set up in recent times to go against policy that they feel like the people of the UK should not be adhering to. You, as a former MP, what would you say are the key ways, apart from writing a letter to your local MP? Because I want to give you a scenario. What if, the vote is so close? Because this is what I predict is going to happen, because I've seen it happen in other countries. What if they go on a vote for digital IDs? And by the time they go on the vote, it's so close that it wins. They make it through, and the digital ID bill gets passed, and everybody's now mandatory for everybody to have a digital ID. Now, how can people reverse that? Is it possible? Can you go through the legal channels? Can it be a we the people v the government? Is there something else to do than just going to your local MP? Because at this point, writing to your local MP, and you've done this, you fought for Watford as much as possible, and you did a great job at doing it. Not everybody can do it, and not many local MPs. And you said it, if power is their main interest, they will want you to back them to be re-elected. But unfortunately, some people, it's not just power. Everyone has a different thing that they some people are funded to actually push bills. Everyone has got different reasons why they're in politics. So you might say you're not going to re-elect this person. This person doesn't care. So the question is there other ways for people to get together apart from rioting? Because I've got different takes on rioting. I'm not a big fan of just rioting, because I come from a legal background, and I feel like sometimes taking people to court sometimes does the job. But the question, can there be a we the people? If 100 lawyers from families that are affected by digital IDs come together and say, this is what you have led, can we take you to court? Because this happened, years ago with the Nuremberg trials, where the companies were actually taken to court because the history behind. I don't want to go too deep into it, but if anybody researches the Nuremberg trials, they can see that they won because we the people decided to come together and say we're not going to let this affect us. So is there other ways we can hold the government into account to change a policy that they've passed through, like digital IDs, if ever they succeeded to make this mandatory?
I think there's the route that you have effectively is to engage with your MP and the ministers and sort of raise those concerns. It's to get the evidence to highlight the concerns from other countries and so on. Sadly, the truth is, with the majority that Labour have, if they whip their MPs to get this through, they also have a huge number of Lords in the House of Lords. The absolute truth is that because of the size of the majority they have, it would be very hard to stop it. But the good thing with British democracy is that as long as they don't then get through to win the next election, it can be overturned, and it's quite easy to have laws overturned. I mean, my take, and it's slightly off topic, but it's a similar vein, is that I personally think that manifestos, a Conservative manifesto in particular, shouldn't be what new laws we want to introduce. It should be what laws we're going to repeal. I'm very much of the mindset that the state should be small. We should have as low a tax as possible. We need to make sure that the state is there to support those who really need it, and absolutely need that safety net. But the state shouldn't be interfering in everyone's lives. It shouldn't be there to create barriers for people. I'm a great believer that the power of us should be in ourselves. We should be have personal responsibility. I believe everybody's got something to contribute, but also that means a certain amount of freedom to live your life that doesn't require the state to get in the way. And the problem we now have is the state interferes with so much of our lives that we end up in a situation where they need more tax to interfere more. That doesn't seem right. And, if I were writing the next manifesto for the party, I'd be doing a repeal bill. I'd be like, these are the laws that I want to get rid of. These are the ways I want to get out of people's lives. These are the taxes I want to reduce because we won't need to be doing all of those quangos and those other things that are interfering. And these are the freedoms that we're going to make sure that people, not just to give them back because they're theirs, their rights. It's the right to be free. It's not the government's right to take those freedoms away. And so I think, there's a bit of a shift, I think, in the mindset. Social media's helped with this, but it's also hindered because I think it's made politics quite toxic over the past few years. And I saw it personally myself as well, with the toxicity and the mistrust. But also I think it's helped because people now can engage more directly with their MP, with politicians, with groups. And I think overall, my take is look at where politics is going, what the next government is, make sure that, I appreciate there's a big question mark over what that next government will look like, whether it's a reform, whether it's conservative, whether it's something else, whether it's a hung parliament and all those things. But engage with your local MP and engage with politics, engage in a way that's peaceful, that gets your point across. And as I say, whisper in the ear of power on a regular basis rather than just shouting in its face and assuming that they'll change direction.
I like that. Rather than shouting at his face and assuming they'll change direction. You played that video from our first guest, Delwboy, where he sort of puts it down on what if the people just don't comply? What if people decide to say, hey, do you know what? You forcing something we don't like with the digital ID, we're just not going to comply. What then does that happen? What does that look like? Is that something that when you were in Parliament, was that ever something that people discussed that maybe the public, the general public might decide just not to comply? And if they decide not to comply, then what?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a truth of all aspects of politics and life. If people decide that they won't en masse do anything, then that's partly a wake-up call. It's also a concern because the way that these things should happen shouldn't be making people feel forced into a position. But I think I would hope that we won't get to that point, that people feel the need to not comply with the law. I would like to think that Parliament will work to enable this sort of thing to not happen in the first place. I mean, I think the scary bit that comes out of all this is the mandatory piece. We already have national insurance numbers. We already have passports. We have all of these things that from a business perspective, it's more work for them as well, introducing new systems. So it's another hammer blow for business, and the costs of this will be extortionate. The technology required to do this is not an overnight job, so there's so many aspects to this. I mean, I personally would be surprised if they managed to do it, in part because I don't think there's the technology ability to get it implemented.
I think there is. I think there is because of who's behind it all. I mean, the company Palantir is behind a lot of what's happening universally, and that's a multi-billion-pound company who have stated this is what they want worldwide. So they're investing heavily into it. I actually think the government in itself will not even take the cost of implementing it because there are factors behind the scenes that are investing heavily into this for their own data mining reasons.
I was going to say, if I may, my other big concern with this as well, though, is the data. It's the cybersecurity side of it. So, I mean, I very much doubt that if this sort of system was put in place, that there's really going to be enough safeguards for all of the bad actor countries around the world to not be putting all of their resource into trying to hack and get into these systems. So, anything that was rolled out quickly from a technology perspective, without the checks and balances, with all those things. And the reality is the next election is 3-4 years away. In reality, Labour have got about you have a year really to ramp up, a year or two to do your thing, and then a year or two to prep for the next election. So there isn't really that much time, and I can't see them wanting to go into the next election with an absolute disaster on their hand technology wise. And you might be right, there might be the technology there already, who knows? But I think my prediction is that this might get kicked down the lane a little bit, or if it did come in, it would be, it might be implemented around the time of the next election, but I don't think it's going to be happening tomorrow. But who knows? I mean, I dread the fact that it would be coming in at all, because the mandatory piece for me is not right.
I mean, the one thing we learned from COVID was that 4 years is a long time in the government. It is a long time. You know, the digital ID thing leads us quite nicely to the next question of freedom of speech and just freedom in general, which, you know, if Donald Trump and his people can actually criticize freedom of speech in the UK, of all people, like, let's not talk about what he's doing in America, but if Donald Trump of all people can literally come into the UK and say, do you know what, I might be bad, but this is crazy, right? It's I mean, it's like the pot calling the kettle black, but let's be honest. A grandma being arrested for saying something on a Facebook page, someone being arrested at 3 a.m. for reposting a tweet. You know, you're having a lot of, you know, people being arrested for praying. I mean, this is things that are happening on a consistent basis, where there was even a clip where a police officer who was arresting a young man for reposting a social media comment. The police officer was being filmed and he looked like he was almost in tears because the woman was asking him, is this what you signed up for? Are you honestly telling me that there are criminals out there really committing real life crimes, and you're coming here to arrest a little kid or arrest a grandma who's 70 or 80 years old for doing what exactly? When you look at digital ID as our topic of the day, and you look at this freedom of speech issues that we're having, don't you think this is already the plan that's already in place? Because we're seeing that we're seeing that play right in front of us. The freedom of speech is being eroded.
I do worry about the concept of policing tweets rather than the streets, as I've heard it said. I don't know what the source of that was, but it does worry me. I mean, the irony again, actually, I was on the online safety bill, so I was involved in what the purpose was of that, which was to protect kids from seeing awful content. From my take was, if it's illegal in the real world, it should be illegal in the virtual world, in the sense that if some sicko couldn't go into a playground and show certain types of content to children, they shouldn't be able to do that online. And that's a very clear, it's a line for me very clearly that if it's illegal offline and somebody's doing it like grooming kids or whatever it might be, that's utterly wrong, and it should be stopped. And I actually helped get through an amendment on the online safety bill. I was one of the few MPs who did, which was to push for a thing called Zach's Law. I'll give you the background of the story. Actually, it was awful. So there was a young lad called Zach Eagling, a lovely, brilliant kid, really lovely kid, who's got cerebral palsy and epilepsy. And during COVID, he did a charity activity, and his mom proudly posted this stuff online and would show him what he'd raised and what people were saying. And then these people who knew that he had epilepsy, photosensitive epilepsy, started to send flashing images via Twitter, as it was then called, and I believe Facebook, to trigger a seizure in this poor kid, which they successfully did. Similarly, then it turned out that, and we got evidence on this during the online safety bill committee stages, that the Epilepsy Society would have its website hacked, so that when people were going to the site to innocently find information to support them through being diagnosed with epilepsy or for support as part of the support network, they would be the website would be hacked and send flashing images to people to trigger seizures. And this was happening not just on one or two occasions, it was regularly, purposefully, maliciously causing harm, physical harm in somebody through digital means. And I lobbied very, very strongly. I even sat outside the Chief Whip's office at one point, camped out to make sure that we could get an amendment agreed in the committee, which we then did, to make sure that this was outlawed. Over the course, it took me a couple of years. One of my colleagues, Suzanne Webb, was very much close with me on this, making sure we got it through. With Zach's laws now in place, you can no longer send flashing imagery, or it's illegal now to send flashing images to people to trigger a seizure and to people with epilepsy. I took Zach with his local MP as well to go and meet the Prime Minister at the time. So it was a really, it was a good conclusion to it. But the purpose of that bill was, in my mind, very, very clearly about protecting children and vulnerable people, but not about stopping freedom of speech. One of the bits that came out of it, though, that for me was a real concern, was the use of algorithms. So whereas in the past you might have somebody in the corner in the pub on a Friday night spouting nonsense and and causing talking rubbish in the corner, or perhaps threatening, or whatever it might be, that in the past that would have been, well, that's the person in the corner, we might avoid them. But that would be, they could say it, they'd be free to say it, they're free to do what they want. But what the algorithms on these social media platforms often would do, they would find that content and then they would push it to people in a way that actually wouldn't normally be found. And one of the examples of this was for young teenage girls, where they might be looking innocently online about clothing or whatever. They might click on something about a different sized piece of clothing. It then starts telling them about diet techniques to reduce their size, and then before you know it, they're in a rabbit hole of being pushed anorexia content, being content to make them feel awful. There were stories about some children getting tics because of the content they were looking online. It was having a physical impact on their lives in ways that actually they would never have found that content in any other sphere of life. It's because it was being pushed to them. And there were lots of stories of this. I mean, one of the other absolute horror stories that still breaks my heart, having been involved with the interview with the father, there was a gentleman, I won't say his name actually, because although he was on it, it probably wouldn't be right without checking with them first, but whose daughter sadly had ended her life through suicide. And the content that had been online, that the bullying content, all of the rest, Facebook, as it was then, I think it was pre-Meta, wouldn't release the content, I believe. I'll say allegedly, just in case I'm wrong, but wouldn't release the content to the coroner so that the parents could see what content had been done. So there were, this idea that it should be unfettered freedom for these platforms. I saw the harms that they were doing, but it shouldn't be about policing people sending putting an individual tweet up or an individual piece of content, unless it was genuinely, proven that they were going to it was to specifically cause harm. In the real world, people have freedom of speech. They should be able to voice that, and you shouldn't have to worry about what you're saying online or offline. There should be the case that these platforms should be told, actually, don't push harmful content to children. Don't push graphic content to kids. That should be anyone's red line. But the idea that people would, or that bill is now being twisted to get the police to go to knock on someone's door because they said something that might have hurt someone's feelings, that's not right. And that's an absolute, a nonsense. The other thing I would say, if I may, sorry, I'm probably giving a very long answer, short question.
No, absolutely fine. It's fine. Absolutely.
The other thing that concerns me with all of this is this, the use of legal processes in the political world as well. Because what we're starting to see, I think, is this increased use of I will sue you if I disagree with you politically, and also this toxicity of using really quite strong language and on the verge of violent language towards politicians. Now, you go into politics and full well that you're going to get abuse, and it's the sad truth. I got threats, all sorts of things. It wasn't nice. You sort of have to a point, take it on the chin unless it properly crosses the line. But what you're starting to see now is this use of lawfare, I think it's called, of going after people legally around what they might have said in terms of freedom of speech. And that also has a chilling effect, because actually the benefit of our system, you know, was a working class kid. My dad was a lorry driver. You know, I came from a very normal background. I never thought I'd be a MP. In fact, when I was a kid, I never thought I'd visit London, never mind Westminster, and I never thought I'd get to be a member of Parliament. It wasn't in my sphere of what I could do. But the reason why we can do that in the UK is because actually there isn't a financial barrier as such to being a politician. You don't have to be a millionaire or necessarily amazingly well connected. I know I was neither of those things, and still neither of those things, you could argue, on that front. But what I would say is that what we're starting to see now is that people are scared to go into those roles because they're worried, will they get sued? You know, if they say the wrong thing against their opponent or say the wrong thing in a particular way, will they get sued? And I think there's a genuine concern, and it's growing and growing, of this sort of litigation culture that not only will you potentially get a visit from the police if you say the wrong thing in the wrong way, you will also potentially get sued to high heaven, and you won't be able to, you know, afford your mortgage or your rent. And this has been shown this week in terms of that closure of people's ability to do what they want to do and say what they want to say. This week, there's been multiple stories at the Labour Party conference of journalists, including left-wing journalists, having their passes blocked because they might have said. There was one instance, I was listening to the radio yesterday, a guy who's a Labour-leaning journalist who'd spoken at a fringe event, I believe, at the Labour conference. And then the next day his pass wouldn't work, and it turned out they'd rescinded it because he'd said something on stage. Now, that doesn't feel right in any way, shape or form. So I think what's happened is that the tools, and it's to your point about the creeping effect of digital ID and all of these things, which is my general concern as well, is that what they were there for, the intended purpose, isn't what they're now being used for. But again, I think the good thing with democracy is that the people do eventually manage to have their say, and they have their say every few years at the ballot box, and they'll have their say at the local elections next year. So, you know, the big talk at the moment is whether Keir Starmer will survive survive the May elections next year. Often, you know, from an American perspective, they're sometimes called the midterms in the US, but in the UK, you have these massive local council elections, and those local council elections will be a very much a line in the sand that will show.
Unfortunately, I don't think I might be wrong. I don't think he cares. I think he's a pawn in the bigger game. I feel like Keir Starmer was put for a specific mission, and once he's done with his mission, I don't think he cares. He doesn't look like someone who's passionate about the country. There is no. He's passionate about what he wants to pass on as law, but in terms of being passionate about people, passionate about the country, he doesn't look like someone that can connect with normal voters. So I don't think that's what he was put there for. I think they put the person who was very much more cold-hearted enough to be able to push this through, and that was Keir Starmer. I don't think he's a bad person, by the way. I don't think he's a bad person. Like I remember Boris Johnson before he got the Prime Minister. I remember having drinks with Boris. I remember Boris Johnson actually. I wrote a script for something I wanted him to do for me. I remember him just going like, let's do it on Tuesday. He filmed the whole thing. We didn't have to pay him for that. He filmed the whole thing, did it for. And I remember Boris Johnson's dad, who was also an MP, coming to the awards, doing stuff.
Well, listed at your awards, I remember.
Yeah. I feel like even Boris Johnson is against digital ID now. I feel like Boris Johnson was also put in position for a particular purpose, and now he's against everything that the government is against digital. He posted a video 3-4 days ago saying he's completely against this digital ID thing. And to your point about harmful stuff online and connecting it back to digital ID, I don't want to veer into this, but it's very important to veer into this. Me being a Christian, I always look at things from a certain lens. When you read the Bible, it does say in the Bible that, if you look at the last book, Revelation, it does say the mark of the beast will cause, if you don't have it, you can't buy or sell. And when you look at the system, I'm not saying digital ID, by the way, is a market abuse. I'm not saying that at all.
I was wondering where we were going there.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, but when you look at the system in place, digital ID, the introduction of CBDC, cash being extinct soon, it seems like a system is being created to make it very difficult for you to buy or sell if you weren't part of that system. Would you say that's correct?
Can I give you a slightly counterpoint that's probably the same point? So I think it's actually more about convenience. So I remember I've worked in the digital space prior to politics and post in the digital space for quite a long time. And I remember giving speeches probably about 20 years ago, actually. In fact, I used to do a lot of seminars. It probably was about 20 years ago, talking about the fact that even back then, people seemed to be more happy to give away their personal data via then cookies and so on, and whatever early fledgling social media platforms might have been around. It's probably more like 20 years ago than 25. But, you know, we're happy to give away content for convenience. The convenience of watching that content that they might want to watch, the convenience of getting ads that are relevant to them, the convenience of having access to certain things or games that they can have. The amount of data that we as a society globally probably have given away to the Metas and the X's and the these platforms, the Amazons and so on, the amount of personal information that we give away, we wouldn't dream of giving to government in any way level. I mean, if you think, could you imagine a situation that you have with, say, Amazon, where people come to your house every single day to deliver parcels? They know where you live. They're probably connected to your Alexa lights. They know where you physically are. They can track you wherever you are. Why do people allow that to happen? It's because it's convenient. Is it
convenience? Is it convenience or preconditioning?
Well,
because there's a difference.
Yeah.
Because preconditioning is when you get someone to learn a way of doing things slowly, and then it becomes part of what you are. And it's like, we talked about this with Mark Cuban the last time. It's like social media. You know, Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook has preconditioned people not to be able to be as social anymore, because Mark Zuckerberg himself wasn't a social person going into this. So is it preconditioning that has led people to be able to give away data, or is it convenience?
I think it's a bit of both, because it becomes habit forming and it becomes something that you just do. You know, if you think how much content you will get for free movies and music that you get for a very small charge every month, you know, through subscription culture. But what I was going to say to your point about government is, if you think from a government perspective, managing all of the different systems that exist out there is very complex. It's very, very complex. And from a government perspective, if you could go, well, actually, if I implement this system over here, it's going to make life much easier. We can track this better. We can do this, that, and the other. The difference is that the one is opt-in. One is the case that people go, well, actually, I get a benefit out of this. I'm going to get to watch a free movie, or I'm going to get to listen to my favorite artist, or I'm going to get a discount on these clothes, or whatever it might be. That's a personal decision, even if it's preconditioned or whatever. It's a decision that's opted into. However, there comes a point where, when all of your friends and everyone else is doing it, you go, well, actually, I'll probably do the same, because everyone else is getting their deliveries every day. And it may well be. From a government perspective, what governments tend to do is that they watch this and go, oh my gosh, actually, you know what? If we did a similar thing, it would be much easier for us. Actually, if we had everyone's data all in one place, you know, we could just track this stuff and it'd be more convenient, it'd be quicker, it'd be easier, we can know more. But the worry of that is that that's not an opt-in system. That's a mandatory system in the case of what the digital ID stuff. And actually, it's something that people will react against, because nobody would give the amount of information to a government that they'd give freely to a Meta and a X and so on, and Amazon. But once the government starts to go, actually, we'll have a bit of that will make our lives easier. That's when people quite rightly go, hang on a sec, I'm not here to make the government's life easier. I'm here to, You know, you should be out of my way, get out of my life, get out of my way. I want to live my life and do my own thing. And that's where it starts to get complex and murky and difficult, because actually, you know, one of the things that I've been very, I've felt for a long time, and this is, you could argue this is probably almost in the digital ID space, but if you go to a hospital at the moment, I mean, it's starting to be more digitized. But if you go to a hospital often, or a GP or whatever, the amount of stuff where you might have injured your arm, for example, and broken your arm, but you'll get seen by one surgeon or in GP about your arm, but the impact of that might have an impact on your daily life. It might have an impact on your work life. It might have an impact on your mental health. You might have an impact on a load of other things. So actually, there's an argument that you could say, well, actually, wouldn't it be better if there was what I would call a single patient view within the NHS? So rather than lots of different documents all over the place, they look at you as a one human being. You're the one who, you know, if your arm's injured, then they think long term, what could that mean in terms of what painkillers you might need in 10 years' time? Or could that have an impact in you in other ways? And so actually that would be convenient. It would save a lot of money, but also it would be better for the patient. The catch with that is that I would never want that to be a mandatory system. But as a patient, I think it would be quite helpful to be able to say, actually, I will opt in to make sure that you see me as one person. You're helping me do this stuff. But also I might want to opt in and do what I used to call data donations, like organ donations, like data donations, where you share your Apple Watch or Fitbit information and your heart rate and so on, so that the GP can see that and work out whether the drugs that you've taken have actually had a positive impact or negative. So there's benefits to that. But as soon as the government would go, right, you've got to opt into this and we want all of your data, that then becomes a worrying thing. So the government will often look at these things, and it's happened over many, yes, this isn't a new thing, and go, what's convenient, what's new? But what works in the commercial corporate world is very different in terms of data and opting in than it is for a government saying, right, you've got that and we want to take it, and it's a legal requirement, because that's a very different beast. And I think that's where the challenges come with this, because the solutions out there to make life easier and cost less, but actually if that balance of that is losing more freedom, that for me is a very worrying thing, and people shouldn't go into that blindly.
No, I mean, I definitely see your point. And on the point of convenience, and you mentioned a few brands there. You mentioned Amazon, you mentioned Meta, and a few of these these tech brands. And recently Trump came to London, and he came with the CEOs of some of the biggest tech brands. In fact, most of the brands you mentioned, Amazon, the CEO of Amazon, CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Nvidia, like literally who's who in a tech world. Now, there's been a term, you're a very big supporter of everything needs to be democratic, is the democracy, but there's a term called technocracy, which the fact that Trump showed up with all these tech giants who literally, we are on platforms right now that, if YouTube, and this happened during lockdown, if YouTube decides to ban you, they can ban you. If Instagram decides to lock you out, they can lock you out. So seeing all the tech companies merge together with government, doesn't that really, and seeing what's just happened in America, TikTok has just been bought. I mean, 80% or so of TikTok has been bought. And, and looking at what TikTok did with freedom of speech for Americans, doesn't that go back to the point we're trying to make here of digital ID? If the tech's CEOs are getting into bed with the government, the politicians, and they're slowly introducing digital ID, they're getting rid of cash, introducing CBDCs. Is that not exactly nothing to do with convenience? They are selling you convenience, and what you're getting, you're literally going to be in a prison, offline and online. Offline, you get, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so ironically, that's what one of the aspects of the online safety bill was, to protect against that. It's been quite actively trashed by some quarters, but actually one of the aspects was that there was a colleague of ours, a long-standing MP, I think it was David Davis, who had put a speech out. I can't remember whether it was YouTube. It was one of those. It was on a platform, and it was removed on the premise that of what I can't remember what it was about. If I'm brutally honest, off the top of my head, but he put a speech up somewhere, and it had been removed. And it was a speech from Parliament. Now, in Parliament, you can say what you want. You have what's called privileges within Parliament, so that actually you can say what you want in Parliament. That could be libelous, could be lots of those things. No one can go after you legally. If you said it outside, then it then becomes a different thing. But it can be played on a video because you said it in Parliament. So anyway, this video was pulled, and then it was eventually put back up. I forget which platform it was. It might have been Facebook. Either way, one of the aspects of the bill was to protect against that. It was to say, look, actually, this sort of content should never be taken down. You shouldn't allow to reduce freedom of speech, and especially from a political perspective. But these platforms shouldn't be the arbitrators of what freedom of speech is. And actually, part of the online safety bill was also to protect freedom of speech, at least when I was involved in it, with the committee stages I was involved, because my worry was that what was happening was that the world sees through a lens of those platforms, the content that's on those platforms, the way it's pushed through algorithms. But also, if they can just decide what content's going to be removed, that is a great worry. And so actually, ironically, that bill was in part to say you can't do that. Ofcom should be able to intervene and sanction them if they've started to remove content for the wrong reasons, or for any reason, because actually that's freedom of speech. And so I think that's where democracy does come in, because you need the people to be aware of these concerns, to be engaged in that way, to be able to push their local politicians, to be able to whisper in the ear of power, to say, if you do this, we won't be in power much longer. But the problem is that, and I'll have to try and find the links for you somewhere, when we had those platforms on the Online Safety Bill Committee, the interviews I gave were unusually quite fierce, because we had, the way the bill worked is you had 12 weeks of what's called pre-legislative scrutiny, which is very unusual. Normally you go straight into different first, second, third readings. This was before the bill was introduced. And over those 12 weeks, we interviewed everyone. We interviewed the founder of Wikipedia, Martin Lewis, who is well known in the UK for as a money expert. We interviewed Frances Haugen, who was the whistleblower for Facebook. We interviewed the Epilepsy Society, charities upon charities, people who've been impacted negatively. Rio Ferdinand, if you know him, a footballer, all about the harms of social media in where it's gone outside of it just being freedom of speech, but actually where it's purposefully harming people. And we did a series of interviews with TikTok, with Twitter as it was then, with Facebook. And the sense I got across all of these conversations was that they would all argue, well, we've spent billions on reducing harms. But my argument was, well, it still isn't working. You're still, the algorithms are still tuned in to push harmful content, hateful content to people who are vulnerable, because you know full well that they will have more of a reaction to that type of negative content than they will to positive. And you're pulling them into these rabbit holes. Now, I have no problem with somebody seeking out that content if they want to watch it, if that's the way that they're inclined. But pushing it to kids who get sucked in and get preconditioned, as you put it, to watch more of that and to affect their lives and to distance them from their parents and to allow bullying when they're at home in their bedroom, that for me never felt right. And those platforms at that time, and I held them to account on it, were doing that. And that was where the bill, in my mind, was going to bring a lot of value. What's ended up happening under this government is it's been twisted. So if somebody says something hurtful online, they're now getting a knock on the door from the police, and that isn't right. So I do think you're right. There should be an absolute separation between these big platforms and government. Of course, there's going to be some engagement. They're such big organizations, but we do have to be really careful about how closely they're interlinked, how closely our data is being shared and used. And that does come back to the fact that makes me even more strongly in favor of making sure democracy works, because there's no other way that you can stop this happening than the people expressing a view at every election. And I don't just mean general elections, I mean local elections, expressing their view by voting in or voting out the people who are making the decisions to enable that to happen. And amazingly, when that happens, especially like last year and in other big churns, when that happens, things do change. They may not change as quickly as it seems, but actually it does change, because if you're in power, you want to stay in power, and you start to wanting to listen to people, especially when elections are around the corner.
No, I mean it just goes back to the point I made, which you've just confirmed it in a way that, you know, information hierarchy. You know, everything you've said in terms of protecting people online makes sense. Passing that bill, online safety, makes so much sense. Unfortunately, as it always happens, when you look at history, most of the things that make sense are always abused by those in power. So unfortunately, that's where the distrust comes from, because literally anybody can argue digital ID, the good sides of it. But the thing is, everybody knows that's not what's going to be. Everybody can argue CBDC, and you could say, well, I mean, would you want to have, if you had 20 million in cash, would you want to keep that, you know, in your house? I mean, security, I'd rather put it on. But then in theory, it's not going to be like that, because literally with CBDC, for example, which is the next topic I want to talk about, you can be locked out of the system just by having a lower social credit. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be introduced as a replacement to cash, and it will be, the whole world is going into CBDC now. You just have to do it. Banks are closing. Everybody's going into this. Is the new currency. You just got to go through it. But the thing is, that much control over your own, the hard-earned cash. I mean, I remember when, you know, when I was very young, and the first time, you know, I did well in terms of a company. I was 19 years old. I went to buy my first property, and I went to my bank. At that time, I could say it now because they know that was my bank, Abbey National. And I said, I want to withdraw this amount of money. It was a huge amount of money. And it was, they had meetings upon meetings upon meetings. Why would you want to do this? Why would you want to withdraw this money? What's happened? Are you being forced? So literally, I felt as though it wasn't my money in the first place. So it felt like I was literally begging. I had to prove, I had to, and this were, and the bank managers they kept apologizing because they knew me. So they kept saying, I'm really sorry, this is just policy. We just have to do this. We have to ask you these questions. We have to do these meetings with you. We have to go through all of this with you. And what do you think? And that was 29 to 30 years ago.
And I think, you know, the truth is, I think we've probably both seen videos online of people where they can't withdraw cash over a certain amount and so on. I mean, my take is that we need to make sure, and it was one of my plans for one of my next sort of big pushes within Parliament, should I have been re-elected, was about protecting cash, because, you know, but again, it goes back to convenience from a government perspective, to stop tax fraud, to make sure you're getting all the money in that you want to get into the treasury, to waste it on your quangos and all the rest. What's the best way of doing it? Well, where you've got an economy based on cash that you can't track, or is it based on an economy where you've got digital currencies and you can see every penny people are spending? And that's the worrying bit. Again, it's convenient for the government to do that, which in turn takes away freedoms and liberty from people. And I'm no big conspiracy theorist. I don't believe necessarily there's a big sort of one person saying you must do this, but the patterns are still there. It's still happening in different ways. So whether we agree or disagree on why, I do think there's an element that government is going to try and make life as convenient as it can to make sure that government can keep running. And that's why, in my view, a small state, low tax society and government is the best way to go, because then you can focus your efforts on the few things that you need to help ensure people can be looked after through the welfare that they absolutely need. But also it means that freedoms for the individual to not be tracked and monitored and all of those things, because the worry with that is you could end up down this slippery slope. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but it could happen over time. And it's the classic story of the is it the frog in the saucepan, that if you if you put a frog in a saucepan, I'm condoning anyone doing this, so please don't. But if you put it on and you gradually turn up the heat, it won't jump out, and you eventually get to boiling and it's dead, because the temperature gradually rises and it doesn't realize and doesn't notice until it's too late. And I think, what we have to be mindful of is not just the pace of change through digital and tracking and data, but also what might be seen as a freedom to be able to watch any film you want, a freedom to listen to any song you want anytime, a freedom to buy anything you want at any time. What's the flip to that? What freedoms are you giving away over that time, especially once government says, actually, we'll have a bit of that, and I'd quite like to know what you're doing 24/7, because that helps us run government, and that shouldn't be the way it is. And I say that in part because I'm a creative as well. I mean, you'll know these are my paintings behind me. It's my children's book behind me. For me, creativity can't be controlled, and actually that goes back to freedom of speech as well. I listen to music by bands in the 90s that I may not agree with, or probably wouldn't like me as a Conservative MP, but bands who I may not agree with their politics, but I will enjoy their music. That's a freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of those things is so important. And that also comes through in creativity. And what we're seeing, in particular with comedy around freedom of speech, is this idea that, comedy is being policed. We're seeing that, creativity is being policed. I will support the right for somebody to say something that I disagree with, because my take is that and I said this in Parliament about the point that, light is the greatest disinfectant. When we were talking in a debate on freedom of speech in universities, where people were being cancelled as speakers, my take is actually, let them say what they say. And most people will probably go away going, well, that's stupid. Actually, when you pick it apart, that doesn't make sense. That's nonsense. And they won't need to be cancelled. They just won't have people turn up, because they'll go, actually, it's talking rubbish. But you do that not by taking the stage away. You do it by shining a light on them and saying, look, actually, you give them the freedom of speech to be able to say things that people go, actually, no, that doesn't make sense. I don't agree with that. You don't take away their ability, because what happens is that they then go into the shadows, and with the social media age, they can go into the shadows and create little tribes around their beliefs.
Followings,
aren't right, that then actually can turn into harmful behavior or harm others. And so I'm a great believer that, when it comes to, freedom of speech, it's also about our ability to push the boundaries, to say things we or hear things we don't agree with, to have art and creativity and films and things that might be about topics I don't quite like, but I don't have to watch them, but stopping the person from saying it is wrong. I can choose to not listen to that, but saying that I shouldn't be, you shouldn't be saying it or thinking it is chilling. And I'm writing a science fiction novel at the moment. I'm just finishing it. And one of the aspects of that, without ruining it for anybody who does read it in the future, is about, freedom. So actually, I won't say much more, but it's about that element of, what are you giving away to make life easier for yourself? We could end war tomorrow, probably everywhere, if everybody didn't have free will, but then nobody would have free will. So actually, what are you losing in the balance? And I think we have to be very mindful of what we're giving away for what looks like a benefit or a carrot at the end of a stick.
No, completely agree. I mean, and I'm talking about your books. My children quite like your books. Your children books. I definitely recommend it. And you talk about creativity. You can see your painting at the back there. Creativity is very important. But you mentioned something while you were talking, and you mentioned it a few times. The why and conspiracy theories. I am not a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, I know.
At least, I mean, I'm not into the conspiracies, but I mean, when you look at people who you label conspiracy theories, they get it right 80% of the time. When you look at what you investigate people who they call conspiracy theorists in the media, and you investigate what are they actually saying. Because the thing is, it sounds crazy at a time. 40 years ago, 30 years ago, if someone said digital ID, that sounds a little bit crazy. If someone said, hey, you know what, they can lock down a whole country for a few years, you'd be like, no way, nobody would do that to the economy. If you lock down the world for 2 years, the economy will stop. They would never do that. It happened. So many things have been labeled as conspiracy, and then there are things that are put in your face. I mean, we have to, unless we say the World Economic Forum is a nonsensical meet up at Davos where politicians just meet to drink coffee and drink cocktails and then get back in their private jets and go back home. Unless we want to say that, or we want to be honest and say there are things that have happened at the World Economic Forum that we've seen come to pass year after year. So is it a conspiracy at this point, or is there some truth in these crazy things? Because there's the good and bad. You happen to be part of the good side, so it's fortunate that you're part of the good side, because what you can see is pretty much good. Where you can see good in the world, not everybody is like you that will see good in the world. Some people are really on the other spectrum of evil, and you've seen it yourself with the attacks you had online, when you were an MP, for just doing the right thing, or saying or speaking your own truth. So there are two sides of the spectrum, and the same way as there's a normal Joe Public who's completely mental online and writing abuse and saying the most vile things online, the same way that same person could be in Parliament too. It's just a different platform. This platform might be on social media, and that causes an amount of pain that will make you want to take an action. And this other person will be in a platform that will literally cause an amount of pain that will take your entire job away, or take your entire profits away. Is there some truth in this conspiracy theories, or are they all loonies and crazy?
No, I think it's more that human nature means that you end up with overreach. So, within any space where they say, don't they, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so for me, it's not so much that there are, when I say conspiracy theories, I mean sort of the idea of like a small cabal of people who are controlling the world, all that sort of stuff. I genuinely don't think that's necessarily the case. I think partly what I saw in government were people often at the very, very high levels just trying to get through the day and dealing with the distractions and the challenges that were being thrown at them day after day after day. And, I think if for example, there were a big conspiracy theorist of using COVID, for example, which I know was one of the big ones to control people, whatever, that massively backfired, because actually we came out of that, the government lost the massive majority, things didn't work out where people had to stay at home, all of those things, in part because people pushed back against it. They didn't want to be controlled. They didn't want to have lockdown last longer than it needs to. I won't go into the mechanics of it, but but what I do mean is that when you've got people in power, and also people who want to seek power, they're going to there is always the risk of abuse. And again, when you then throw into the ability, the concept of convenience, so convenience in terms of having people have digital ID or do certain things to make life easier for those at the center so that they can do things more easily, but the risk of being the balance of taking away freedom, there is a risk of that always happening. I just feel very strongly that for all of those reasons, whether there were conspiracies or not, or whatever which way we want to call it, whether there's power overreach or whatever, that we have to make sure that in everything that we do, we defend democracy to the hilt. And that democracy needs to start with the people being able to decide who is in power and being able to have the ability to remove them from power. And without, again, opening all the Brexit debate again, the reason why I was pro-Brexit, and for a very brief period of time I was a Brexit Opportunities Minister, although people have different opinions of that, I just felt very strongly that having known MPs prior to becoming one, that and prior to leaving the EU, was that there were decisions being made in Parliament, or rather there were decisions being made for the UK that weren't being made just in Parliament. And when I was the Brexit Opportunities Minister, there were over 4,000 laws on the statute book that weren't British laws, they'd come from the EU. We might have bought into some of them at certain times, we might put them on ourselves, but the reality was that was there. And so, that for me doesn't feel right when you've got decisions being made elsewhere being imposed upon the country. And so that's why I'm such an advocate of a small state government, why I'm such an advocate of people power, in the sense of the ability to have that power at the ballot box. We do have regular elections, and the idea that MPs, the vast majority of MPs, whether they're in that knowledge hierarchy or whatever, the reality is a lot of them will want to stay as MPs. And the power of that, when they're not going in the voting lobbies, or where they're going to their whips, saying, look, I'm going to lose my seat unless you change this, it does work. And the TIPS bill is one example of that, but Zach's Law was another. That was never going to be part of the online safety bill. It was only really because myself and one of my colleagues, Suzanne Webb, we fought for that. And it was behind the scenes. We didn't get much coverage for it. We weren't in the newspapers as such. But we quietly, behind the scenes, kept pushing to say, look, not including this when it's probably the prime example of harms being done online because of online in the real world. It was the perfect example of it. So it does work. But the problem with Parliament, and actually it was quite a common phrase for MPs, is that there's a joke that if you want to keep a secret, say on the green benches in Parliament, because actually people don't sit and watch those debates. But actually, if you sat in Parliament for a month and watched the debates and watched the back and forth and watched the lobbying behind the scenes to remove damaging amendments or to put in new amendments that actually are going to change things for the better, that does happen, and it does help, but it's also not seen. And I think a lot of people don't really see that bit. They see their politicians on the TV or on social media and assume they're representative of the whole party or the whole political positioning, but actually there's a huge number of MPs behind the scenes who are just going in the library, looking for the legislation, looking for the loopholes, looking for the bits that aren't going to be on the TV, but are quietly making a difference for their constituents and for the country as a whole.
Definitely. Now, finally, the UK is one of the most CCTV. I mean, they say for every mile that you go to, there's 10 or 20 CCTV cameras. It's a big brother state. And when you were in Parliament, and this connects quite well with digital ID, when you were in Parliament, was there any talk of smart cities? Because you see, the smart cities have been talked about as something that's in plan in a lot of countries in the next 5 to 15 years. And it will be a smart city created in such a way that you cannot leave to go somewhere else 15 minutes away, because everything will be in the same place. Convenience is what it will be sold as. Yeah. But also you will be in a sort of smart prison whereby your carbon credits will be taxed, so you can't travel as much as you used to travel before. You can't just get on a plane and go. You have to look at your carbon credit. So this all kind of fits back, because everything is being released in a very much scattered manner. But we see that it all comes together in the end, and so it all plays into a big workable system.
So actually on that, there was quite a big pushback, and the government, the Conservative government, I believe, I'll need to check because it was a while ago, but did push back on that. But this, again, actually is a slightly different take on the democratic side of things, because a lot of the places that were looking at those conveniences were a lot of the local councils. It was at a local democratic level. It wasn't necessarily at a government level, even though there was an element of that looking at those things. So that's where, again, the general public going to their councillors and arguing that they don't want this stuff, pushing back at that level, because again, these things are sold under the arm of convenience. or under the umbrella of convenience. Sorry, and that's the concern. I was never pro those. My concern again is, you start to look at, if you take Watford for example, there's a lot of push to be. One of the crazy things, actually, I'll give you an example. I'm jumping back into my old world here, but one of the crazy things there was that the local government, the local council, were building massive towers, 20 odd story towers in Watford, which, we're not a London borough, which seem crazy. There definitely needs to be more homes, but, this idea of building just tall towers. But then the other crazy part was that not only were they pushing to build these, but they and blaming the government, as is always the way, it's the blame game. They blame the government saying targets, and the government and myself were saying, no, you've decided to do it this way. But what I was going to say was that the crazy part was that the push was to have no car parking related to them. So you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of new people moving in without any car parking spaces. And that means that how are they going to get their shopping? They would have to go within a 15-minute route. So these things don't necessarily come through big government saying top down, you've got to build this 15-minute city. It can come from local democracy and local decisions that most people, understandably, you go to work, you don't want to go to a council meeting or meet a councillor, but actually should be aware of and engaging and saying, we don't want this stuff. We don't vote them in next time if they're building these things without car parks. But the other part, if I may, that I think is so important on this is one of the reasons why I push back on the ULEZ scheme. So the clip you showed right at the start, which probably feels like hours ago now, which was quite fun watching myself back on the green benches. But with ULEZ, I back in whatever year it was, 2021, 22, I can't remember. There was this scheme pushed by the Mayor of London to have this idea of taxing cars effectively, or charging them if they went into the outer part of London. So you've got the central London, you've got Greater London, and then you've got the places like Watford and places in Hertfordshire and the other areas that aren't part of London, but sort of border onto London. And the idea was that if you happen to, say, live in a house here and you need to get to the supermarket here, you might need to drive into the edge of London and come back out to go to the shop. You're not going into London, you might go into that. But then because of that, you get fined. You have to pay a charge, like a congestion charge. Now, that was tried. I picked up on it. Some of my colleagues flagged it to me as well. I wrote a letter to as you do, wrote a letter to the Mayor of London to say, look, I think this is terrible. I got a load of other colleagues to sign it too, to say this is a ridiculous idea. It's an unfair border tax on my constituents and on everyone else who lives around London. And then he didn't do it, interestingly. Now, I don't think it was just my letter that stopped it, but we got a lot of coverage, and I think he was using it as a negotiation tactic with the Department of Transport at the time. Possibly, that's my take. I might be wrong, but either way, that stopped. A year later, suddenly this thing called ULEZ comes up, this ultra low emission zone. And then all of a sudden, it's not about getting money for people driving. It's about clean air. And it's about using the environment. And as I put it earlier, greenwashing to say, oh, yeah, actually, you know what? This isn't about just money. This is about protecting our air, even though all of the evidence showed that it was a minimal impact on air quality. And I'm not diminishing the impact of people in central London having those sorts of schemes, because actually, it's very condensed. If you've got asthma, it could be awful. But on those outer areas, many of them green and leafy, actually, it's not having an impact. So I fought very hard to push back against that. And interestingly, I think the clip that you showed there was where I was arguing, as I had done many times, to stop it. And there was an opportunity on the bill that my colleague had put through at the time, Gareth, who put through this bill as a private member's bill that actually found a loophole that could have stopped ULEZ from going forward. And if I recall on that, if it's the same debate, the opposition, the Labour Party is the opposition back then, played silly games and manufactured a way to talk out the bill, which basically means if you go over your time, it falls and you can't get it through. So, there's a lot of gamesmanship on these things. But, for me, the ULEZ scheme is similar to the CCTV stuff. there's a fear I've flagged that there's a trial going on for CCTV cameras to use AI to be able to not just spot if you're driving too fast, but to see if you've got if you're using your phone,
criminal record,
other things.
Yeah.
So scope creep again. So for me, it's again, it's convenience. It's to get more money out of people through stealth taxes, and the impact is again the impact on our freedoms. And in that instance, if I may, sorry, I might be going on now, but in that instance, one of the other points I raised in an earlier debate when we were trying to stop it was, but this shows the power actually of writing to your MP and engaging. I had a constituent that wrote to me that worked at a charity where I think they used to transfer either blood or something to hospitals, but they had to use their own vehicles. And they had written, I think I may have even written to the mayor to say, look, this doesn't seem fair that they would have to pay you, Les, because they're performing a charitable role for the NHS. Surely they could be exempt. And he said no. And so I then was able in Parliament, when we had the debate, to raise that issue and highlight the fact that it wasn't just charities and these organisations, but nurses and doctors and all sorts of people who would be driving in and out, have done their night shift or whatever, might get caught out twice by the fines. So there is a way to voice that. Sadly, it got through, but there was a big pushback at the time. And I just think these stealth taxes, these approaches just aren't good for our freedoms and liberty, but also are damaging to the economy in ways that I don't think people realise until it's too late.
Isn't the government doing what they are supposed to do in terms of the definition of government? Is the Latin definition of government is to control. So is government doing what they are meant to do, just controlling the people, or is there an illusion of choice that the people have? I'm not saying you, Dean. I'm talking. I'm not saying you. I'm talking in general.
The role of the government is to represent the people, or the role of politicians is to represent the people. I always used to regularly talk about the fact that I was a public servant, and I think actually the vast majority of MPs, as much as they're maligned and criticised, I think the vast majority are of the same mindset. They're not all just bred in, with. I used to joke I wasn't born wearing a tie. They're not all born wearing ties and silver spoons. There's people with all sorts of backgrounds and across the floor in terms of all parties. But power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The scope creep and the ability of convenience, the ability to get a problem off your back if you just get on with it and then move on to the next thing. There's lots of reasons why these things happen. But my take, and it's a very simple one, and I've said it a few times: smaller government, lower taxes, less interference, focus on the few things that you need to do to help those who need the help and do those well, and let people get on with their lives. And the role of government shouldn't be to control. It shouldn't be to get in the way of ambition, shouldn't be to get in the way of people. The role of government should be there to support people in their hour of need and enable the people who can get on and have the ability through a meritocracy to succeed, to be able to give back and help support those around them. And I think we're going down a route at the moment, especially with the current government, without being too political again, of that being twisted, where the role of people seems to be to pay the government's debts that they've racked up, which is the hard-earned cash that people have earned by going to work every day. So I think if that is the case, that the government or any government feels that of any party, then that's where democracy needs to come in and make sure the people in power know where they should sit, and that's at the feet of the people, not towering over them.
Fantastic. Dean Russell, former Member of Parliament for Watford, thank you so much for joining our show, Debated Live, today. It's always a pleasure to have you on board, and I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people. And we always say this on the show on Debated. We're waiting for you to run as the Prime Minister. I mean, I will have some faith in government. If you run as a Prime Minister, I'll support. The people that are running it now, I don't think so. But so we're waiting for you to run as a Prime Minister, and then we'll be good to go. But it's been great having you on the show. and enjoy the rest of the week. And looking forward to having you back on again. And yeah, thank you so much, Dean. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been fun. Cheers.
No worries. Take care. Take care. Right, that was Dean Russell, a former MP there for Watford, on the show Debated Live today. We also had Delwboy, who kicked up the show. Amazing interview. They're very inspirational. Make sure you check him out at Delwboy. For more information on Dean Russell, you can contact us on the show. Yes, it's been an absolutely fantastic show today, Debated Live. Hope you guys got some insight on digital IDs, got two sides of the story, and also do your own research. It's very important. And don't listen to me. Go and do your own research too, and find out what you will do if something like that came into pass. Would you go for it or would you not? Drop your comments, get through to us, and tune into Debated Live each and every Wednesday from 6:30.